Welcome to the Numbers Game. I'm Cynthia Frelund, and this is our third Week 10 episode, which is very cool. And this is the one where we break down all 13 remaining NFL games based on the key contextual stats driving the forecasted scores and player projections. I really enjoyed chatting trades with Michael Irvin, and I think you'll love the conversation too. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. The Playmaker was the perfect person to talk to about all of the wide receivers with new homes and other big trades. As always, thank you for coming to hang out. It means a whole lot to me that you're choosing to spend some of your time and energy with me. And I also appreciate all the superlatives that you sent in. They're hilarious, and my favorite 3 are sprinkled throughout the show. They're so funny and so smart, so well done. Last week, my model went 11-4 straight up, 6-8 against the spread, and 8-7 on totals. That brings my season to 66.7 straight up, 51.8 against the spread, and 52.2 on totals. I'm still a little under the weather, so thank you for bearing with me with the hat and the voice. The math is still good, just the presentation's a little nasal. We do get breakfast and football again this week, though, which is great news. This happens to be the 55th International NFL game, the second time ever in Munich. This time around, the Giants, who are one of 4 teams that are undefeated on foreign soil, square off with the Panthers, who are coming off their second win of the season last week over the Saints. The Giants are 6-point favorites in this one. New York leads the NFL with 35 sacks. They actually have 8 players with at least 2 sacks, which is the most in the league. Our friend Dex, well, he leads all defensive tackles with 9 sacks, and he has the 3rd most pressures at the position with 28, even though he gets double teamed at the highest rate in the league, about 65% of the time. But in this matchup, we have to talk about Brian Burns, the former Panther who leads the G-men with 35 pressures, 17 of them coming in under 2.5 seconds. The Giants have blitzed at the 8th highest rate on about a third of dropbacks, and the Panthers have allowed a 10% sack rate against the blitz, and they have the 6th lowest passing success rate when they face the blitz at just 37%. Carolina's Chuba Hubbard has been contacted behind the line of scrimmage at the 2nd lowest rate among running backs and has racked up a career-high 211 yards before contact. He's also one of just 4 players with 5 or more rushing touchdowns to also average 5 or more yards per carry this season. You are still going to want to play him in fantasy because the Giants have allowed the 5th most yards before contact to running backs at 314, which is part of the reason why they're allowing a league-high 5.2 yards per carry overall. Bottom line, Giants win 24-17. The G-men have averaged 15.4 points per game this season, fewest in the NFL, and the Panthers have allowed 32.6 points per game, which is the most in the NFL. If this pace holds, it would actually be the 3rd most in the Super Bowl era. In other words, this is the spot for New York to increase their offensive output greatly. The Giants winning ranks 5th of the 14 games this week in confidence. Back stateside in the early window of games, 2 more NFC South teams face off in New Orleans when the division-leading Falcons come to town as 3.5-point road favorites over the Saints. If you remember way back in Week 4, this game was a really weird one where the Falcons won on a last-minute 58-yard Younghoe Koo field goal, but Atlanta didn't score a single offensive touchdown. This time around, Atlanta will face a changed New Orleans defense with Marshawn Lattimore now a commander, and they have much better odds of scoring on offense this time around. One of the most interesting notes about this offense is actually a tendency to track, as Kirk Cousins has used play action on every single one of his 30 dropbacks when aligned under center this season. From the shotgun, he's used play action on just 3 of 210 dropbacks, so under 1.5%, and he's done it on 13 of 71 from the pistol, that's about 18%. In other words, if we see shotgun, we should be on alert for play action. New Orleans' stat nugget this week is about Derek Carr, who's completed the 3rd highest percentage of passes, about 79%, and leads the league with 12.8 yards per attempt when targeting the middle third of the field this season. This is an area the Falcons have been vulnerable to, allowing the 2nd highest completion percentage, about 80%, and a league-high 6 touchdowns without an interception on such passes. Bottom line, look for creativity from the Saints offense and tight ends, mainly Taysom Hill, to try to get at that middle third of the Falcons defense. But expect a big game from Bijan Robinson and Atlanta's offense as New Orleans, since week 5, aka the week after they played the first time, has allowed the 2nd most yards before contact per carry at 2.5 and the 5th most yards after contact at 3.4, which adds up to almost 6 yards per carry. Even though the Saints are 15-6 at home against the Falcons since 2003, my model says Atlanta remains undefeated on the road this year and sweeps this 2024 series with New Orleans 25-20, which ranks 10th in confidence. Let's finish up the NFC South with a really interesting game in Tampa, where the Niners come to town off their bye as a 5.5-point favorite. The Niners get Christian McCaffrey back, which is clearly a big deal. But just as a reminder, he generated the most rushing yards over expected last season with a whopping 349. For this year in particular, the main area he forecast to really help is in the red zone. As of right now, the Niners rank fifth worst in this crucial area of the field, scoring a touchdown on just 48.6% of red zone drives. Last season, they were first in this metric at 67.2. McCaffrey led the NFL with 62 carries, 75 scrimmage touches, and 18 scrimmage touchdowns in the red area last season. Further, and specifically in this game, look for an uptick in the use of play action. Brock Purdy has averaged a league-high 11.4 yards per attempt using play action, but he's only used it on about 20% of dropbacks, which is the sixth lowest rate in the league. The Bucs have allowed a league-high 60% success rate when defending play action this season. More Christian McCaffrey means increased red zone efficiency and likely more play action attempts overall. Baker Mayfield earned an awesome superlative that I totally agree with from bdetrick40 on Instagram, which is the Fantasy Unsung Hero Award, which leads perfectly into our Bucks point, which is all about Baker, who leads the NFL with 23 touchdown passes, and no one else has more than 20. But he also has scrambled on a league-high 14 attempts on third down this season, gaining 106 yards and 6 first downs with 6 explosive third down scrambles, so that means he earned more than 10 yards. And on early downs, he scrambled 10 times for 83 yards and a touchdown. The 49ers defense has only faced 8 total scramble attempts from quarterbacks all season, which is tied for the second fewest. But on those 8 scrambles, they allowed 96 yards and a touchdown, and that is 12 yards per carry if you want that calculation. Bottom line, Baker Mayfield is certainly having a special season, but the Bucs defense ranks bottom 6 in passing yards per game allowed, passing touchdowns per game allowed, and opponent passer rating. Niners win 26-22, and this ranks 11th in confidence. A few fun quick notes here that show why it's a little bit closer of a game than you might expect. In their last 5 games following a bye, San Francisco has allowed just 14.4 points per game. However, this season, they've allowed more than 20 points in 6 of their 8 games. San Francisco did defeat the Bucs by at least 13 points in each of the last 2 seasons, but their defense is not as stingy this season, which is what drives a closer game in my model. The game I've spent the most time on in this early slate is Pittsburgh at Washington. Obviously, the trades made for interesting projection changes, but in general, this game has a bunch of cool wrinkles and folds due to the quarterbacks and now both defenses. The Commanders are 3-point home favorites, implying that on a neutral field, the teams would be equal. The second superlative is from Kerry Minner on X, and it's about Mike Tomlin, who's most likely to coach until he's 80. The best part about this is that he probably would continue his streak of no seasons under 500. He's also probably one of the only people ever to be able to switch quarterbacks the way they have and somehow get better. Even though it's a small sample size with Russell Wilson, a potential strength-on-strength matchup in this one is on play action, where Russ has earned .48 EPA per dropback, which is the second highest in the NFL. However, even before acquiring Marshawn Lattimore, the Commanders were allowing only negative .06 EPA per play-action dropback, which is 6th fewest. Overall, the Steelers have used play action at the 5th highest rate, but that is across both quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels has the most EPA per play when pressured this season at .06. Pittsburgh has pressured quarterbacks at the 13th highest rate, so about 34%, and they've allowed negative .69 EPA per play when they pressure quarterbacks. That's the 3rd most. Bottom line, the Commanders' defense has allowed a league-low 147.2 passing yards per game since Week 4. And if Marshawn Lattimore plays, things become even harder on Russell Wilson, as he's allowed a career-low .7 yards per snap as the nearest defender in coverage that ranks 3rd among corners. The Commanders win 26-22. And by the way, Mike Tomlin is 25-6 against rookie quarterbacks. That is 3rd best since 1950, but the ways Washington is getting to 3.1 points per drive, which is the league's highest, have enough diversity to slightly buck that trend. However, Washington winning only ranks 12th of 14 in win confidence. How about a list? How about a new list? Let's go with main character energy. Since we already kind of know who's good in fantasy, or maybe your fantasy team is already toast and you want to focus on daily fantasy, etc., it's time to look at a few trends that can help forecast where some of the main guys have easier odds of maintaining their trend of main character energy, aka they're worth paying up for in DFS, or you can count on them for big days, kind of like we do with the bland projections at the end of the show. Number one, Najee Harris has had 100 or more rushing yards in 3 straight games, which is the longest streak of his career, and he can become the first Steelers player to have 4 such games since James Conner did it in 2018. Washington's defense has allowed 143 rushing yards per game, the 4th most, along with the 2nd most yards per carry at 5.1. Number 2, George Kittle has caught 17 of 19 targets for 197 yards and one of his touchdowns when the nearest defender in coverage against him has been a linebacker. That's the 5th most such yards. And the Bucs linebackers have combined to allow the most receptions, 52, yards, 671, highest completion percentage, 86.1, and 3rd most yards per target at 9.3 among all linebacking core when targeted in coverage this season. Number 3, Justin Jefferson is just 103 receiving yards away from breaking the record for the most receiving yards in a player's first 5 seasons. Right now, Torrey Holt currently holds the record with 6,784. And by the way, Justin Jefferson gets the Jags, who rank 31st in both passing yards per game allowed and also passing yards per play allowed. Will Justin Jefferson break that record in Duval this Sunday? Vikings are 4-point road favorites. Sam Darnold has the highest success rate on deep passes this season at 52%, and he's earned the 7th most EPA on them at 0.75 per deep pass. Jacksonville has allowed the 3rd most EPA per deep pass this season at 1.2. Tank Bigsby has forced a missed tackle at the 3rd highest rate among running backs at 37.6%. He's also earned 153 rushing yards over expected, that is the 6th most at the position. The Vikings have the 5th highest missed tackle rate, about 15%. However, they're one of 4 teams, Chiefs and Ravens and Steelers are the others, to allow negative rushing yards over expected. Bottom line, Trevor Lawrence has an 86.5 passer rating against the blitz, which ranks 21st. And Minnesota not only blitzes at the 2nd highest rate in the league at 41.3%, but the strategy of early down blitzing, and remember, not all blitzes are the same, means 3rd downs are even more tricky, and the Jags already rank 30th on 3rd down, or 3rd worst. They only convert 31.6% of the time. My score is 25-19 Vikings, and Minnesota winning ranks 8th in confidence. My model has the Vikings extending their streak of scoring at least 20 points in each of their games this season, but will it have the Bills continuing their streak of 30-plus points over the past 3 games? Buffalo is a 4-point road favorite in Indianapolis. The Bills have scored 30 or more points in 6 of their 9 games this season, but they're on a 3-game streak of doing that right now. Let's find the pain point in the Colts defense for Josh Allen and company. It's intermediate passes. Those are the 10-19 air yard ones, where Allen ranks 4th in EPA per pass and also has 7 touchdowns, which is tied for the most in the league. The Colts have allowed the 3rd most EPA to such passes at 0.65 and the 5th highest success rate on them at over 61%. A game plan the Colts could follow to find an edge over the Bills would be to leverage Jonathan Taylor, similarly to how the Dolphins used Devon Achane last week. Taylor has 78 rushing yards over expected, which ranks number 12 among running backs, and by the way, he's even missed time, so that's a great rating. Outside rushes were very successful at the start of the season, where he averaged 7.2 per carry through week 4 before his injury. This is an area that forecasts to get even stronger as he gets healthier. Bottom line, the Colts defense ranks 31st in rushing yards per game allowed at 149.8. And even though they have 3 of the NFL's 8 leading tacklers this season, it's hard to beat the Bills when you allow them to control the football. My score is 25-19 Buffalo, and the Bills winning ranks 9th in confidence this week. This would also mean that the Colts streak of having all of their games decided by 1 possession projects to continue. Let's move on to another game where an AFC East team is on the road, this time in Chicago, where the Patriots and Bears rookie quarterbacks face off. Drake May has the 5th highest completion percentage over expected on pressured dropbacks this season, but this will be a tough test, as New England's O-line has allowed the highest pressure rate at 43%, and Chicago has generated the 10th highest defensive pressure rate at 35%. However, a number of key defenders, including Montez Sweat, are still on the injury report as of this recording. Caleb Williams earned a superlative from Scott H. Wild 13 on Instagram, which is the most yards running for his life award. I think this relates to the fact that the Bears' offensive line has allowed the fourth highest pressure rate at 39.5%. Good news in this one for Williams and Bears fans, the Patriots have generated the sixth lowest pressure rate and fifth lowest sack rate. Also, it follows that Williams is best on shorter and quicker passes, which bears out in the data, pun intended. He's ninth in passer rating on pass attempts under 20 air yards with a 104 rating. Bottom line, Chicago by a touchdown, 24-17. The Bears have held opponents to 20 or fewer points in 6 games this season. Only the Chargers and Steelers have more such games. And my projection has Chicago adding one more game to their total. Interesting fact here, New England is the only team not to have a single player with multiple receiving touchdowns so far this season. However, running back Ramondre Stevenson has had 2 touchdowns in each of his last 2 games. And some of those aforementioned Bears on the injury report, namely defensive tackle Andrew Billings, who I believe is getting pec surgery, does increase Stevenson's odds of reaching pay dirt again in this one. Next up, let's head to Kansas City, where another rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, gets to experience his first career game at Arrowhead, and of course, Patrick Mahomes up close and personal. The defenses may be the story of this matchup, though. Denver's defense has allowed just 17.9 points per game this season. That's third fewest. They also have just missed 12% of their tackles. That's the 7th lowest rate. And they've allowed just 376 extra yards off of missed tackles. All great numbers that would be even better if they could somehow extract Derrick Henry's performance against them. Without the traded away Baron Browning, the blitzes and pressure will adjust, but let's look at kind of how they're blitzing and when as of right now. They blitz on early down, so first and second down, about 48% of the time, which has resulted in 20 of their sacks. That is tied for the most. And this maybe, though, could not be the move because the Chiefs have allowed the league's lowest pressure rate against the blitz and are tied for allowing the fewest sacks when defenses blitz at just 3. Kansas City's blitz, especially with the addition of Josh Uche, which they've done at the 4th highest rate, 36%, and allowed Next Gen Stats' 3rd lowest success rate, is likely a better source of success as far as the battle of whose blitz works in this one. Bo Nix has only a 36% passing success rate when he's facing the blitz, which is the 5th lowest. Further, should the very athletic Nix try to run, maybe he should target outside the tackles runs, as the Chiefs have allowed a league-low 223 rushing yards on runs between the tackles, and they've missed the 2nd lowest percent of tackles on such runs. Bottom line, Andy Reid's win percentage against the AFC West as the Chiefs head coach is very, very high, 78%. He's 53-15. And he forecasts to move to 54-15 in my model with a 25-18 victory over the Broncos. And the Chiefs winning ranks 3rd in confidence. Interesting note to track, and it's only 2 games in, so I'm on top of this one. But the DeAndre Hopkins effect so far is good, as in Mahomes has a 114.7 passer rating with him on the field versus 85.4 when he's off. And Travis Kelce's results with and without Nuke look like this. With, he's seen 12 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown per game versus 4.7 receptions, 40.8 yards, and 0 touchdowns per game without. If the Chiefs allow fewer than 28 points, this will be their 30th straight such game, which includes the playoffs. Which brings me to our next list, which is streak or freak, where you get to decide if a streak, especially a small sample size one, is a justification enough to believe the trend will continue or more of just a freak coincidence. Number 1. Broncos wideout Courtland Sutton now has back-to-back over 100 receiving yard games. He's averaged 111 receiving yards per game since week 8, after only averaging 39.6 from weeks 1 to 7. And by the way, he had 0 100-yard games over that span. This is an extremely tough matchup against the Chiefs, but we said something similar about Zay Flowers' chances against these same Broncos ahead of last week, and we're extremely wrong. Number 2. Last week, Kirk Cousins had his 2nd straight game with 3 or more passing touchdowns and no interceptions. By the way, he's only had 2 such games over his past 2 prior seasons. Does he make it 3 against the Saints? Number 3. Justin Herbert has had at least a 90 passer rating in all 8 games this season, which is the longest streak of starts by any NFL quarterback to begin a season since the Chargers' Phillip Rivers did it in each of his first 13 games in 2018. But now he faces the number 1 passing and number 1 total defense in the Titans. This week, my math rates all 3 of these as freak, but they are in order from least to most likely, and it is a great segue into Titans at Chargers, right? The Titans head to SoFi to take on LA in the 11th regular season matchup since 1990, where the number one total defense faces the number one scoring defense in week 9 or later. The home team Chargers are 7.5-point favorites. To be clear, the number one total defense is the Titans, and the number one scoring defense is the Chargers. In 9 of the 10 previous matchups, the number one total defense is won, which would be Tennessee if you were basing your pick on that alone. But here's what I've got for you. The Titans defense has the highest run stuff rate against design rushes this season at 30.2%. Safety Amani Hooker leads all defensive backs with 11 stuffs. Overall, they've allowed the fewest yards per rush on inside runs at 2.9 and rank 14th against outside runs at 4.6 per carry. The Chargers defense plays zone at the third highest rate, over 83%, and they use cover 4 at the highest rate, about 30%. Mason Rudolph has only faced zone at the third lowest rate. However, all 4 of his passing touchdowns have come against man. Bottom line, the Chargers have set season highs in sacks over the past 2 weeks, and even though Khalil Mack has been on the injury report, the advantage still lies in LA's defense. Further, the one spot the Titans defense is vulnerable to something the Bolts do well is red area rushing. Tennessee has allowed 0.9 rushing yards over expected, which is the second most in the league, and the Chargers are 7th best on such red zone rushes. Chargers win 24-16, and this ranks 4th in confidence. Another team that's really good at running the football, the Eagles, head to Dallas to match up with a very injured Cowboys squad in a game where the Birds are 7.5-point road favorites. The Eagles have the second most rushing EPA on a per rush basis at 0.08, and the Cowboys have allowed 0.16 EPA per rush, which is the most. Saquon Barkley has the 7th highest yard after contact per rush rate at 3.7 yards, and Dallas's D has a 26.5% missed tackle rate, which is 5th highest. CeeDee Lamb has 294 yards after the catch this season, with 124 of them being yak over expected. That is the second most in the NFL. I feel like this number should be even more impressive or bolded in some way because he's done this under extremely difficult circumstances as basically the only pass-catching threat. The evidence here is his 29.1 target share, that's 7th highest in the league. Bottom line, Eagles win 27-19, and this is number 1 in confidence. Something to watch for, 12 personnel, so 2 tight end sets. The Eagles use this at the 5th highest rate, about 32% of the time, and they've scored 11 touchdowns when they use it. That's tied for second most. Dallas has allowed 13.7 passing yards per attempt when facing 12 personnel, which is the most in the league. It's weekly wildcard time, our list of 5 lesser expected touchdown scores. I'm talking about the guys who aren't in the top few in terms of scoring touchdowns at their position. You definitely didn't draft them in round 1 of your fantasy league. These are guys who have elevated end zone reaching odds this week. Number 1, Tyrone Tracy. Not only does he have 413 rushing yards since week 5, which ranks 5th in the NFL, but Carolina's defense has allowed league highs in rushing yards per game and rushing touchdowns with 159.3 and 15. Number 2, DeAndre Swift against the Pats. Swift has 615 scrimmage yards since week 4, which ranks 4th. Number 3, Kareem Hunt against the Broncos. Hunt not only leads Kansas City with 118 touches, 465 scrimmage yards, and is tied for the team league with 5 touchdowns. By the way, he's done this in 5 games. But he also leads the whole league in touches per game with 23.6. Number 4, Darnell Mooney against the Saints without Marshawn Lattimore. And number 5, James Conner, who's in our next game and will be a big part of the strategy to keep pressure off Kyler Murray against the Jets front, who's coming off an 8-sack game in week 9, which is tied for the most in a game so far this season. On to the desert, where the Jets have a longish rest after their week 9 TNF win, and the Cardinals are fresh off their 20-point victory over the Bears. This week, they are 1-point home favorites. I see a number of Jets linemen on the injury report as of right now, but I'm making the assumption that they play in my calculations, which is especially important considering the Cardinals are coming off their highest sack game of the year with 6 sacks last week against the Bears. Aaron Rodgers has used quick passes on 55.1% of attempts, which is the second highest rate, and Arizona has allowed the second highest rate of those passes to be successful, 61.5% of them to be precise. I already mentioned that the Jets are coming off their best and tied for the league's most sacks in a game of the season with 8 last week, which makes the odds of Kyler Murray having to pass outside of the pocket even greater. He has been great on such passes, though, with the third most yards per attempt at 9.3 and both the second highest passing EPA and success rate on such passes. And by the way, he hasn't thrown a pick from outside the pocket. But New York's defense has allowed the fourth lowest success rate and seventh lowest completion percentage over expected on passes outside of the pocket. Bottom line, even though the Cardinals defense has shown a lot of improvement over the past 3 games specifically, and they added Baron Browning to help bring pressure, the Jets have increased how effective their pass catchers are, with an example of Garrett Wilson going from bottom 10 to top 10 in both receptions and receiving yards over expected since the addition of Devontae Adams. The Jets defense is really good when they blitz. They've allowed the fewest EPA per dropback when blitzing at negative 0.45, and when Kyler is blitzed, he has a negative 0.25 EPA per dropback, which is ninth fewest. This drives my final score, which is an upset. Jets win 23-22. However, this only ranks 13 of 14 in confidence. The Jets' TNF opponent from Week 9 has not only had a longish rest, but also figures to get their wideout one, Nico Collins, back this week to face the Detroit Lions, who are 3.5-point road favorites. Guess what year it was when the Lions last won 7 straight games? 1995. That is 29 years. This could be the game that breaks a 29-year drought. One big thing I'm looking at in this one is the Lions blitz. After adding Zadarius Smith from Cleveland at the trade deadline, will they stick with the elevated blitz rate we've seen since Aiden Hutchinson's injury, or will they go back to the levels we saw with Hutch playing? As of right now, the Lions blitz rate ranks 6th at 33%. And they've allowed negative 0.43 EPA per dropback when blitzing, which is third fewest. Maybe in this game they do stick with the blitz because it's a pain point for CJ Stroud, though. He ranks 21st, averaging 6.6 passing yards per attempt against the blitz. Houston's defense is and has been extremely good against the pass, with the second highest pressure rate allowed and lowest completion percentage allowed in the league this season. Should Will Anderson Jr. not be able to go, things will be more difficult, though. And by the way, that is still unclear as of this recording. His on-off splits show a 9.4 percentage point increase in blitz rate with a corresponding 6.5 percentage point decrease in pressure being applied. Strategizing to stop the Lions' run game will likely include stacking the box, which they've done at the 5th highest rate, 41%. And the Lions, they rank 8th best in EPA per rush against loaded boxes this season. Bottom line, Detroit wins 27-21 in my simulations, in large part because of all of the answers the Lions have on offense to handle pressure. It is wild that the Lions have more touchdowns than incomplete passes, with 26 and 24 respectively since week 3. The Lions winning ranks 7th in confidence this week. One thing is absolutely for sure, though. Either the Goff being 4-0 on the road or Stroud being 4-0 at home streak, or both, if it's a tie, will end. Which brings us to our last game of the week, where two teams with different 3-game streaks match up. The Rams are 3-0 since their Week 6 bye and are 2.5-point favorites to the Dolphins, who are 0-3 since their bye. Tua Tagovailoa leads the league in quick passes at 58%, and the Rams allow the second most yards per attempt to them and the 6th most EPA. Jared Verse has 39 pressures and Braden Fisk has 25. Their combined 64 pressures are the most by any rookie duo through 9 weeks of the past 7 seasons. They're also the only duo of the past 7 years to rank first and second in pressures by rookies through 9 weeks. Bottom line, since both teams have strong points in their pass-catching games, one of the main differences comes in the run game. In his 4 games with Tua, Devon Achane has averaged 133.3 scrimmage yards per game and 1.3 scrimmage touchdowns per game, compared to with non-Tua games where it's just 47.2 scrimmage yards per game and 0 touchdowns. My math says slight advantage Fins, 24-23 in an upset. However, this is my most uncertain win of the week, meaning it ranks 14th of 14. Now for our menu of bland and spicy ingredients for you to make your own dish with the level of spice you want. Remember, bland or chalky ingredients are those that occur in more than 55% of my overall simulations, and spicy refers to things that happen in only 48%. However, they have variance levels that suggest they are smart upside picks. 2 blands with a spicy makes for my most recommended dishes, but if I'm honest, I like risk, so I usually prefer at least 2 spicies in a bland or just all 3 spicies. Starting with our chalky or bland picks. Number 1, Justin Jefferson to have over 92.5 receiving yards. He leads the league in target share at 33% and averages more yards per game than that number, and the matchup is excellent. It may seem like low-hanging fruit, but I am fine with that, and I'm not going to overthink this one. Number 2, Alvin Kamara to catch at least 5 passes against the Falcons. He's had at least 5 catches in the past 6 games. Number 3, Kyler Murray to have at least 29.5 yards on the ground, so rushing yards. Because my JJ note was so chalky, this one's a little bit spicier, but still counts as bland, meaning it's still 55%. I have Murray earning 37 yards on the ground. And the spicies. By the way, we were 3 for 3 on our spicy picks last week. Number 1, Jared Goff to throw for more than 1.5 touchdowns. I know Danielle Hunter, who leads the league in pressures, is still there, and I know this is a scary pass defense and it's a run-first offense. Short passes, however, count as passing touchdowns, and Goff has the highest completion percentage overall and the highest passer rating under pressure, so here we go. Number 2, Tyreek Hill to have over 74.5 receiving yards. He's only averaging 55.8, so get in on this risky situation now. Number 3, Daniel Jones to throw for more than 1.5 touchdowns. He has 4 such games, meaning 4 games with at least 2 passing touchdowns already this season, and the Panthers D is a good one to target. Further, I have both Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Neighbors forecast for more than 4.5 and 6.5 receptions, respectively, as well. I hope you caught both the TNF primer and the trade deadline special. How good is Irv? Go back and watch it if you didn't see it, or even if you did watch it once, maybe go back again. I watched it several times because Michael Irvin is not only the most entertaining human ever, but 20 minutes with him is like 2 hours with someone else. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter. It is coming soon. I will see you back here for lots of Week 11 fun. All of my numbers are up for you to use as you wish as of Wednesday, November 6th. Remember, they do update daily with injury reports and news, so keep coming back to the spreadsheet. Thank you so much for hanging out, for sending in all of your superlatives, for all of the math fun, for dealing with my illness and my nasal, awful voice and looking like garbage. I really appreciate it. Please keep the dialogue coming. And if you like the show, please like, comment, subscribe, and pass it along so we can continue to grow.